major news coming out of Washington to that finally much needed money in Americans' pockets. We'll give you a basic walkthrough of what this new $900 billion coronavirus relief bill includes. President Trump signed this into law late last night. What it does is it gives a one-time direct check of $600 to any American making less than $75,000 a year. What it also does is it enhances the federal unemployment benefits, as well as more funding for small businesses and vaccine distribution. The Democratic-led House is also expected to vote tonight on its version of a coronavirus relief package. That would increase the payment to $2,000. Now, this is a plan President Trump supported up until having a change of mind and signing the GOP-led Senate version. So, to break down what all of this means for you, what it means for your wallet, we are happy to be joined by Lanhee Chen, political commentator and policy advisor for a few different Republican presidential campaigns, most notably Marco Rubio and Mitt Romney. Always a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Dion.
Okay, let's get right to it. What exactly are the payment details for those checks going out to people, and do we know who is getting them?
We do. So this is going to be very similar to the first round of stimulus checks we saw back in the so-called CARES Act from the spring. But in this piece of legislation, there are $600 direct payments to people making up to $87,000 a year. So at $75,000, that payment begins to phase out. And then at $87,000 a year, it phases out entirely. $600 per adult and per child. So if you have a family of four making about $125,000 a year, you can expect $2,400 in direct stimulus payments. Now, that's not as much as President Trump said he wanted. He wanted $2,000 per person, but it is still something that I think policymakers are hoping will give the economy a boost with all of what's been going on with COVID slowing things down.
I'm glad you clarified. There were a lot of moving parts to how much would be allotted. You know, while you were talking, the Associated Press just made this alert that the House is indeed increasing those checks to $2,000. This means it is going to be sent to the Senate. What is your prediction on what will happen there?
Unlikely we'll see the Senate pass this. This is something that Republicans in the Senate have been very cool to, the idea of additional funding for this particular direct stimulus. There are some who questioned whether, in fact, the payments ought to be more targeted to, for example, those who have suffered job loss or have been affected economically more significantly by the coronavirus or coronavirus-related shutdowns. So I don't expect to see this particular provision make its way out of the Senate. I do think it's going to get some Senate Republican support. I think it'll get some Senate Democratic support, but I don't think that the entirety of votes necessary to get this across the finish line will be there. Mitch McConnell has said as much, that he's going to consider the legislation, but he did not promise, notably, to actually bring the legislation up for a vote because he doesn't think that a majority of support is there from the Republicans in the Senate for this increase.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to monitor, something we will do in the coming days. Well, we talked about the number of what will be on those stimulus dollars, but let's talk about the timeline now. When exactly can people expect to see those checks?
Well, it should be a relatively quick process because we already have the systems in place at the Internal Revenue Service at the federal level to distribute these checks. Remember, we did have one round of these back with the initial coronavirus relief legislation. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has said that we should expect things to start getting underway 7 to 10 days after the bill has been signed. The bill was technically signed by the president last night. So if you start today, I would say hopefully by the second week of January, a lot of these payments should be going out if, fingers crossed, everything works the way it should.
Emphasis on the way it should. Because, you know, this bill took something like 8 months to negotiate. It finally gets approved, though what has been the holdup all along? Because Americans have been clamoring for more relief.
Americans have been. It's typical politics. First, the election was in the way. And then after the election, of course, the president was so consumed with this notion of trying to ferret out election fraud that occupied a lot of his attention. And then more recently, there's been disagreement because, you know, the president himself actually did negotiate this agreement. He had negotiated the agreement via the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, and then he subsequently, after the deal had been struck, said, well, I don't really like the deal very much. So that put things in limbo for a few days. The short answer, Dion, is politics. As is the case with everything else, we have such a divided country. We have a divided Congress. It was tough for Republicans and Democrats to get together, even though we saw a considerable public demand for the Congress to act and to get relief done.
This question coming in from a viewer right now on Facebook. We are streaming this conversation live. Someone is asking, my parents want to know, they are retired, will they still get $600?
Yeah, they should. I don't believe, and again, we have to go back and review the text of this, but it is the case, I think, that it goes to Americans as long as they meet that income restriction. It is designed to help, get some money back into the economy. So the fact that one is retired, I don't believe should have impact.
My question to you is, do you think this stimulus is going to be enough? What would you like to see going forward? What do you think will be most beneficial to Americans right now and going forward as this pandemic rages on?
We're going to have to see how long this all lasts, Dion. I mean, the reality is in California, we're a long way from the end of this economic crisis. We're a long way from the end of a lot of the slowdowns we've seen. Other parts of the country, they're starting to come back out of it a little bit because they had earlier COVID surges. So a place like Illinois, for example, they're going to start to see the economy probably open back up a little earlier than we will. Look, here's the thing. We are going to probably need to have some additional support for small businesses, some additional support for those industries that have been hit hardest by these shutdowns: travel, hospitality, leisure. All of those industries have been decimated by this, not to mention all of the mom and pop stores. You walk down Castro Street in Mountain View or Main Street in Los Altos or different parts of the Bay Area, you see how many businesses have been affected by this. So we're going to need probably another round of some kind of relief for small businesses and for affected industries. I don't know if we're going to see too much more direct stimulus like the checks that we've seen from this bill, but it is for sure that you've got a lot of people out there still hurting. And in California, in the Bay Area, we've got some time to go before we get out of this.
And real quickly, I know we have about a minute left, is a topic that we have covered extensively: the housing crunch, rental relief, rental assistance, and eviction protections. Those are in the bill. So how exactly is that going to assist those renters?
Well, the idea is that it will make stronger those penalties that exist currently against eviction. It will also, I think it is designed to flow through some federal dollars to the state and local level for housing assistance programs like many cities, like municipalities in the Bay Area have. And so the idea is just let's give a little extra support to make sure people can stay in their homes because their incomes have been affected by this coronavirus situation.
Policy advisor Lanhee Chen, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dion.